Well, it looks like the Trump administration is not only going to continue, but indeed accelerate its program of using military force to essentially execute what amount to low level drug dealers in the ocean near Venezuela. But there's something even more disturbing than this criminal behavior that appears to be on the horizon, and that is the use of the U.S. military to attack Venezuela for the purpose of effectuating a regime change of Nicholas Maduro. Now, I have no love for Nicholas Maduro. He's run Venezuela into the ground. But we need to understand the humanitarian catastrophe that will inevitably result if we go down this path. And in addition to that, we need to understand the United States' long and troubled history in its efforts to replace other leaders in the past, and why this will be far more difficult than the incompetent Donald Trump administration knows or can possibly prepare for. So let's look at why we're on this trajectory, and then let's look at the humanitarian crisis that will result, as well as our history in this country. So first, what you have here is a video. This is the most recent attack on what amounts to a civilian vessel somewhere. And you look at the word narco-terrorist. That is not a legal term. It is a term used to inflame the public and try to support what amounts to murder against these people. There you go, $100,000 plus missile, probably a Hellfire, against a small boat. Let's look at the first indication that this is something more than a counter-narcotics program. When you look at these forces, you have 172 cruise missiles, you have a nuclear-powered attack submarine, you have 10 F-35s, which cost $30,000 an hour to operate. Now put all this together, if you were going to create a counter-narcotics program, these are not the platforms that you would use. They're too expensive, it's overkill, and they're not efficient enough to actually accomplish the work that needs to be done. In addition to that, we have had multiple videos and preparations for a beach landing prepared by U.S. Southern Command. Again, if you were going to invade Venezuela, which has a large shoreline, these are exactly the forces you would use. And you can't hear the sound, but this was released with a tick, 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 like, hey Maduro, time is wasting away. And of course, in response to that, Venezuela has done its own military readiness exercises to try to message that it is prepared for this. So both a messaging component and a readiness component. So when you see this happening and you see this trajectory building, of course, you have stories in the media. U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean signals a broader campaign against Venezuela. This is the New York Times recently. Trump officials say the mission aims to disrupt the drug trade. However, military officials and analysts say the real goal might be driving Venezuela's president from power. Let's look at not only the buildup, the New York Times, but what he said with his own words. We're going to diagram this real quick. We want Venezuela to immediately accept all of the prisoners and people from mental institutions, which includes the worst in the world insane asylums, don't know why that's capitalized, that Venezuelan leadership has forced into the United States of America. Thousands of people have been badly hurt and even killed by these monsters. All caps, get them the hell out of our country right now or the price you pay will be incalculable. Let's look at, like I said, I wanted to diagram this. First, he uses leadership in quotes saying they're illegitimate. And Maduro is illegitimate. There's been 2 democratic elections in that country, which he has refused to respect. Thousands of people have been badly hurt and even killed by these monsters. He makes it sound like, Trump does here, that Venezuela intentionally sent people into America for the purposes of hurting Americans, like an attack. Then finally, if you don't get them out, the price you pay will be incalculable. That's key because he's setting up an impossible goal. Okay, Maduro, the Venezuelan government, has no control over whether Venezuelans who may have temporary protected status or pending asylum claims, whatever it may be, can be pulled out of the country. That is a question for the courts. That's a question for the lawyers. That's a question for the individual Venezuelans themselves. So you, Maduro, intentionally hurt my country by sending your crazy people here. And if you don't do what is impossible, I'm going to attack you. That's what this means. Now, this is really critical and probably the most important part of this video you need to understand. Venezuela and the surrounding territories are being crippled by the worst humanitarian refugee crisis we've ever seen in this hemisphere. More than 7 million Venezuelans have left the country since 2015, and 1.4 million are expected to migrate by 2025. I want you to look at this graph. Venezuela, Syria, Afghanistan, and go down the line. Ukraine would be on there right below Syria as far as number of refugees. What do you notice? Venezuela is the only one on this list that was not caused by a war, that did not have a war involved. So when you put a war On top of that, and these weak structures that are in place and the stress that this system is feeling across these different countries geographically, and we'll get into that and I'll explain further, it's basically like dropping an Afghanistan or Syria refugee crisis in a war on top of an existing Venezuela non-war crisis. That's going to lead to millions and millions of more people fleeing in all directions in countries that can ill afford it. Now, what caused this, of course, was Maduro getting in power. First, there was an economic crisis. You can see, I mean, the GDP per capita went down 75%. Same thing. Chavez, who actually had an economically successful presidency, it gets up to $334 billion in GDP for the country. That goes down all the way to 68 now under Maduro. 65,000% inflation. And when you have 65,000% inflation, when you have, the GDP drop that much, you end up with what? 82% of people in poverty, 52%, 53% in extreme poverty. And the inflation rate is still 51%. This is a country of 26.5 million that's lost 7 to 8 million already. Again, the reason the population is important, that's how many more people can flee that country. Okay, 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 more million if a war breaks out. And what happens, again, when you have a collapse of the economy, when you have people in poverty, vaccinations nosedive. And that's what you see here. Even as compared to other countries in South America, Venezuela has an extremely low vaccination rate. And a thing to understand is that certain diseases like measles, if you don't have a 95% plus vaccination rate, you effectively have a 0% vaccination rate. So they're poor, vaccines and the healthcare system is failing, people are in poverty, there's mass migration. That is a perfect recipe for this. Vaccine preventable diseases, this is just in North Santander, which is just one part of Venezuela. Look what happened in 2016, all around the same time. Look at malaria, okay? These things go up hundreds of percent immediately. Measles goes up hundreds of percent immediately. Measles is key because it's highly transmissible, highly communicable. And there have been multiple outbreaks where thousands of people and up to 10 countries have seen outbreaks that originate in Venezuela. So for those people who think, oh, this is South America, it doesn't affect the United States, damn well, yes, it does. Look at tuberculosis. It went from 10 to 30%. I mean, it tripled in this one area virtually overnight. These are things that if they get to the United States are going to wreck our healthcare system and cause an unimaginable catastrophe. Malnutrition. You think of malnutrition, you think of kids not being able to eat, you think of, like Africa and things like that, Somalia, but this is happening, in our hemisphere, just below us, near Puerto Rico, a few hours away. Kids coming into the hospital, unable to eat. Again, 2016, they take off, they double, they triple. And this is one that is incredibly disturbing. It is the maternal mortality rate. And, it was always high, 124 per 100,000, 119 per 100,000, 2013, 2014. But look at it now, 259 per 100,000. United States, EU countries, you're looking 20 to 25 per 100,000, maybe, sometimes as low as 15. And to understand the human impact of this, what these people are under, and it's not just the fact that it might affect us economically or it might cause a transmission of disease. It's immoral. It's wrong. And you know what? Morality and doing things wrong, it still matters, at least in my book. Childbirth in Venezuela, where women's deaths are a state secret. And this is where the New York Times, very, very difficult article to read, but it's also something very important. I recommend that you look at this if you can. We're just going to take a quick understanding of what happens if you're pregnant in that country. Here, she said, a woman is treated like a dog. For many Venezuelan women today, the defining feature of childbirth is roulette. The grueling process of traveling from hospital to hospital, trying to find one that is equipped to help. They often hitchhike, walk for miles, or take buses over roads whose ruts and bumps seem designed to torture them. In rare cases, and it's not really rare cases, it seems to happen a lot, they are rejected over and over until finally giving birth in the street, on the hospital steps, or in its lobby. Here's an example. I threw myself on the ground. Ivaro Shashin, hope I'm saying that right, who said her daughter was born on the lobby floor of the hospital Noriega Trigo in Maracaibo after staff there told her they couldn't take her. It was my husband who had to help me. Okay, you get an idea for the desperation these people are in. So when we're using the military to send $100,000 missiles into boats, you know what? That may be a low-level drug courier. He may have a few kilos. Who knows? But the point is, there's no evidence that's going to the United States. There's no evidence that those are laced with fentanyl. And drugs, are caused by U.S. demand. If there's one thing you could remove from the drug trade in North, Central, and South America right now that would stop the violence and the socioeconomic cost overnight, it is U.S. demand. Our dollars and our guns feed that. Buying drugs is a voluntary transaction. It's not like people from Venezuela are taking small boats 1,500 miles to this country and then, dropping poison into the people's food supply or the water supply or something like that. Even though that's how the Trump administration tries to make it look like, or what they try to make it look like, it's in fact people selling a product that there's huge demand for because of Americans. It's just a fact. And we're killing people who are in incredibly vulnerable situations and doing anything they can to survive. Now, let's talk about the refugees. I showed you 7 to 8 million. This is 6.87 because this is about a year old. Look at where these people are landing, okay? This is Colombia, has 2.8 million. Brazil, 600,000. Peru, 1.866 million. Okay, so you have millions of people streaming over the border from Venezuela. And these are all countries that have 40 to 50% poverty rates, some of the highest in the world. And these are the current conditions in which we're going to drop a war on Venezuela. What do you think is going to happen? And look at this. I mean, just the strain on their healthcare system. The percentage of women of reproductive age, that's what WRA means, in Chile right now, 7% of the women. In Peru, 5% of the women. Colombia, 5% of the women. Ecuador, 5% of the women. Of the total women who are able to have kids are not even from that country. They're refugees. Again, when you get millions more, what do you think is going to happen? Look at the Venezuelan outpatient visits these are hospitals in Brazil. So in 2015, it was basically none. Now look at it. In one city, it was 15,000 outpatient visits at a hospital by Venezuelans alone in Brazil. If there is another refugee crisis, if we attack Venezuela, what do you think is going to happen? That's going to go to 50, 100, 150,000. They're not going to be able to survive. It will be a disaster. And to the extent people want to say in America, because it's a common MAGA refrain, is that who cares? It doesn't matter. Again, measles, tuberculosis, these are diseases that spread. It is our concern. Number one, because we're causing it. So we shouldn't cause things that are going to cause problems. Secondly, this will reverberate back. There will be more migrants. There will be more refugees. And these diseases will make it to the United States. Venezuelan humanitarian crisis is now a regional emergency, new analysis finds. This is a Johns Hopkins Medical School, Bloomberg School of Public Health, one of the best in the world. Did an analysis from an epidemiological perspective of what's going to happen or what the effects this is having. And it's spreading everywhere. Venezuela's health crisis spills over to neighboring countries. That's an NPR article, and that talked about various outbreaks that they've had since 2016, since this refugee crisis started, that have spread all over Central and South America. Now, let's talk about, it's going to cause a humanitarian disaster. It is like dropping a Syrian war refugee crisis on top of a Venezuelan economic collapse sort of refugee crisis. And the surrounding areas can't afford that. But let's talk about the problems the United States has had in trying to change leadership in Venezuela. It is a very bad history, and it's not going to go well, especially with this administration, which has gutted the National Security Council staff, which has gutted our intelligence operations, which has Tulsi Gabbard at the top of the Director of National Intelligence. So coup attempts, they don't really work. 243 successful, 243 failed since from 1950 to 2002. They've worked even less effectively in the Americas. Now, Venezuela itself, interesting, it's a tough nut to crack, okay, when it comes to coups. 92, there's two in 1992 and another one in 2002. And we're going to talk about the one in 2002 and the one in 2019 because we had direct involvement in those. But again, when you look at the one, number 5 at the top, the 1992 coup, Hugo Chavez was someone who was incredibly popular in that country. He was a charismatic leader. He is someone who was a paratrooper, and they had had decades and decades and decades of corruption, of public health problems in that country, and even he was unable to have an effective coup at that time. If Hugo Chavez, with all the right conditions in place, when the perfect storm is there, and he is just the right charismatic person to lead that, is unable to have a regime change, why the hell do we think the United States, with these idiots in the White House, are going to be able to do it? It's going to fail. It's going to be a complete disaster. Now, when we talk about the 2002 coup, okay, we had a direct role in that. We actually recognized a military coup that took over that country for a couple days. Now, just a little bit of background. Hugo Chavez was democratically elected in the year 2000 by um, an election that was monitored by the EU, by the Carter Center. It was one that was done correctly. We may not like Hugo Chavez, or some people may not like him in this country, but the fact is he was the democratically elected leader of Venezuela in 2000, and 2 years later, there is an attempt to overthrow him. And who did they put in place? A guy who, as soon as he got there, dissolved the Supreme Court and dissolved the parliament. And we absolutely were involved. This article is about this. This is from, I believe, the Telegraph. But in addition to that, we recognized that illegitimate government for a couple days before we got pressure and we decided not to. There's a lot of evidence we had a direct involvement. It was Pedro Carmona. As soon as he gets in, he dissolves Congress and suspends the Constitution. Okay, again, what the hell are we doing overriding the popular vote of the Venezuelan people 2 years after they put Chavez, reaffirmed that he's going to remain president of that country? And the guy we put in is the most undemocratic of all. Now let's talk about what's known as Operation Gideon. This is the last one. This is in 2019. Now, it's unclear if the United States had involvement. Jordan Goudreau, who is a guy, a former Army Special Forces medic, somebody who's provided security for the Trump administration, we'll get to him in a minute, claimed that the United States and the CIA, under the Trump administration, remember this is in 2019, promised they would help. Well, the Bay of Piglets, it was a complete disaster. You had a complete failure of this. You had multiple U.S. soldiers, former U.S. soldiers, 2 total, plus Jordan Goudreau, who wasn't in the country at that time, arrested. And, all these guys got thrown in jail. And then you had Nicholas Maduro. I mean, what an embarrassment. This is the last time the Trump administration allegedly had some involvement in an effort to replace this guy. You had him holding up 2 U.S. passports of former American soldiers, veterans who participated. And this is Jordan Goudreau. This is the individual. Again, he's under indictment right now in the United States, but he had a company known as Silver Corp. He knew Keith Schiller, who was Donald Trump's head of security before he became president, and when he was in between his 2 presidential terms. And there appears to be some potential connection there. I'm not saying it is any more than that. Bellingcat did an analysis. Here's Jordan Goudreau right now, or not right now, but here's Jordan Goudreau being shown at a Trump rally, providing security through Silver Corp. You can see Trump on the left, him in the square box, and then multiple pictures of him. These have been geolocated. That was at that time. So, in any event, I hope you can understand and see what's going to happen if these plans carry forward. And you need to understand this against the backdrop of the Pentagon's new media policy, which is blatantly illegal, where they want everybody who has a Pentagon press pass, a part of the Pentagon press corps, to get pre-approval for any story that is provided, that is published, that has anything to do with the military or the U.S. military-industrial complex, even if it's unclassified. And on top of that, Pete Hegseth has summoned 800 generals, literally every general, admiral, and flag officer in the entire U.S. military to show up in Quantico, Virginia, at this giant Marine Corps base next Tuesday. There are a lot of ominous signs, and when you put all this together, we are preparing to do something that not only could hurt Americans, but from a perspective that we should care about, will cause ruinous circumstances for South and Central America. Especially you think about countries like Colombia. They have fought so hard to get above that 30-40, to get down from that 30-40% poverty rate. They fought so hard with us to try to eliminate the scourge of drug trafficking with Pablo Escobar, the Search Block, and Delta Force. And to see what we're about to do to them, and to think about all the women and children who are going to be fleeing through the jungle, trying to get away from the war, unable to get health care. It's disgraceful, and you need to see what's coming. It's going to be the worst thing we've ever seen in our lifetimes in this part of the world. All right, guys, like, subscribe. Thanks for watching. Sorry the video's a little long, but there's a lot to talk about, and it's a critical issue. Love you.